You're listening to Catholic Family Podcast, Episode 23.
I'm Kevin Davis. Thanks for listening to the Catholic Family Podcast. And before we get going, I would like to ask you to like and subscribe to this video. We're trying to reach as many Catholics and anyone really out there who wants to listen to good Catholic content, good cultural content. So please like, subscribe, share, all of that fun stuff here on Podbean or on YouTube. Share it with your family and friends. We really do our best to try to produce good content whenever possible. Today, I'm very happy, very honored to be joined by two of my favorite people. Father Heyne. Father Johannes Heyne is my parish priest here in Munich, Germany. I get to see him all the time. Unfortunately, he also gets to see me. Father Carlos Borja, we go back way back to high school. Actually, we all go back kind of 10, 15 years, which is really neat that we get to have these conversations again over Skype. Father Carlos Borja is the assistant rector, I believe, in Omaha. The right-hand man to Bishop Pivarunas, so he is always busy. Doesn't have too many rings under his eyes, so they must be taking care of him pretty well there in Omaha. And today we're going to talk about a very, very important topic in today's day and age, and it's about the Latin Mass. And as you see with the title, the Latin Mass is not enough, meaning there are different Latin Masses around the world. Some of them are valid, some of them are worth attending, and some are not. And we want to describe exactly which ones you should attend and exactly why, which ones you should not attend and exactly why. We want to make this really clear because I personally have had experiences with my friends that they don't quite understand and have fallen into errors or into ways and into groups that are unfortunately not valid Catholics, and we're going to talk about that in depth today. So, Father Heyne, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, for having me here again. It's an honor to be here.
Father Borja, thank you.
Nice to be here, Kevin.
And so I guess the best place to start would be at the beginning, not at the beginning of the Latin Mass, because that goes back, hundreds of years, and that's not actually the real issue. The issue is, why do we need to have this conversation in the first place, right? Why do we need to talk about some Latin Masses being valid and some not? And I'm sure you both would agree that goes back to the Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council, and the popes after Pius XII. And I don't know who wants to start, but maybe we can just briefly describe what happened after Pope Pius XII died in 1958.
If I can start, I would just say, when he died, then what at least in hindsight, we see the first modern pope came to power. And as we all know, he convoked the Second Vatican Council, where many new, the modern teachings were basically written down as a new creed, so to speak. I think, and for me, that's the Novus, the Second Vatican Council, is basically where they put their new the new creed of the new church that they founded together.
Right, and so what we say is that the Novus Ordo, which I'm sure everyone listening to this show has heard that plenty of times, it all began at the Second Vatican Council, and we say that it was a total split from the Catholic Church, and that the errors they promulgated and preached clearly broke away from the Catholic Church as we knew it up until that point. And so I guess the questions we have to, or the points we want to make first of all, is how can we be sure that the Vatican Council and the Novus Ordo truly split from the Catholic Church as we knew it before?
Well, I'd say that you have the heresy of modernism that really showed itself during Vatican II, and you can even see it in the documents of Vatican II, especially Nostra Aetate, Dignitatis Humanae. And you see things that have been condemned in the past by the church and by different various popes being now taught in the name of Catholicism. You think of collegiality, modernism, indifferentism, ecumenism. We spoke about those earlier, and how these were just a stark a very stark break with what had always been, like I said, what had been condemned in the past now is being taught as part of the Catholic faith. And so it was a very, I'd say, subtle, but very, in hindsight, as you mentioned, you can see, and it's like, okay, it's clear. You can see those things being taught and promoted through means of the documents of Vatican II.
And so when you say those errors, Father, I listened to a podcast by Father Dominic Radecki, I think, or it may have been Father Francisco Radecki, that they're twins, so it's kind of hard to remember which one said what, both of the CMRI. And he said a good way to remember the heresies of Vatican II is the word mice. So it's M-I-C-E. So it's modernism, indifferentism, collegiality, and ecumenism. You said that already, Father. I just want to throw that out there because I really appreciate that help to remember what the errors were. And modernism, as you say, all of these errors were condemned really in pretty recently before Vatican Council. I think each one of those four was condemned within the last few hundred years before the actual council. So they are promulgating things and openly promulgating them that were very clearly condemned and condemned recently. And so I guess let's go real quickly. What are these errors? And we're just going to go real brief description of what is modernism. And modernism, I know, is kind of hard to define. But I don't know, Father Heyne, if you want to give a real quick overview of, I guess, what do we think modernism is now?
As you said, it's difficult to define because it comprises so many different things. Maybe we could just say briefly that it's basically getting rid of the supernatural, the absolute, and it was very well condemned by Pius X. So this is maybe very difficult to comprise in one sentence because it's very wide. But we know that Pius X talked against it.
Right. And at the council, they wanted to. Part of it was they wanted to bring the church to the world, right, rather than the world to the church. And that's how I always think of it. That they wanted it to be modern, literally modern, to make the church new, I guess. Sorry, Father, I interrupted you.
No. I was just going to add to what Father had said was that Pope St. Pius X condemned that, especially in Pascendi. But I believe that he was the one that said that modernism is the synthesis of all heresies. So it's the combination of all these different heresies that have been had in the history of the church combined into one, modernism.
And Father Borja, what would you say about indifferentism and ecumenism? I think they're kind of, in a way, not similar, but what give me a brief definition of those two.
So ecumenism pretty much is saying that everything goes, that all religions lead to heaven, that we all are one, so to say, on our path to heaven, and these other religions have good in them, or good can be found in them, and that we should cherish and promote the good that is found in these other religions, which is something that has been condemned. Indifferentism, is just the aspect that it doesn't really matter what you are as long as you lead a good life and you're trying to do good, then you're fine. There's no need to belong to the true church, and that the church shouldn't have special as it goes into religious liberty, the church shouldn't have special rights or special privileges in society. And all religions are good and dandy, so to say.
Right.
Not only has it been condemned, it's also very, I think, with those two, it's very clear how it goes against what Christ always said, that he is the way and the truth and the life, and that we have to believe in him in order to be saved. And now they come out that every religion is a way to salvation. So I think with this, apart from the question of being condemned, it's very clear against the idea that Christ had.
And I guess what would be some examples of the ecumenism since 1962? And I think that obviously there's some very clear ones.
I'd say first off, the CC meetings. I mean, those were just a very clear aspect of, you have here the man who's claiming to be the Pope, convoking all these religions to CC and asking them to pray for world peace and praying to their false gods, acknowledging or saying that there is value to the prayers of Buddhists, value to the prayers of Hindus, of non-Catholics, etc., which is absolutely blasphemy.
Yeah, that was very. I mean, that's good that you mentioned that, Father, because that was. I mean, what impression does that give to Catholics around the world if the Pope comes and invites everybody to pray to his God? I mean, of course, the message is that every religion is a way of approaching God. And I'd say I would add as a second thing, for example, for ecumenism, the Latin Mass or the modern Mass that we are going to talk more about later. I think that they put this new Mass together with Protestants, and they got rid of many things that are very that Protestants don't like, and they got rid of the offertory prayer, Audubiani and Borja, when they wrote their writing to Paul VI to ask him to give us back the Latin Mass, they pointed out all those things, that the idea of the sacrifice is not expressed, or those ideas were excluded in the new Mass, because they wanted a new Mass that is okay also for Protestants to say, and there were Protestants involved in composing this new Mass.
In the very definition of that, in the Missale Romanum, the new one, if I'm not mistaken, says that the Mass is just simply a gathering of the people of God, presided over by the priest. So the priest essentially is just a presider, no longer offering sacrifice, no longer acting as the intercessor between God and men, and taking away that whole sacrificial nature of what the Mass is and what the priest does as the persona Christi.
And no true presence of the blessed of Jesus, because it says for this meeting that you just mentioned, Father, that I think it's the 7th paragraph, I think, if I'm not mistaken. For this meeting in special are true the words of Christ, when there are 2 or 3 gathered in my name, I will be amongst them. So that's a presence of Christ that can be present even if we pray together. But if in the Mass we have a more specific presence of Christ, like the presence, the real presence in the Blessed Eucharist.
And I want to add that in a recent poll, I think this was in the last few years, they polled Novus Ordo Catholics, so Catholics from around the world, and 70%, that's 70, did not believe in the real presence of the Holy Eucharist. That means 30%, and I assume that's also polling. I assume that's polling the more traditional parts, and I'm sure they're the 30%. So your true Novus Ordo Catholics don't believe in it, which from my view, that is one of the most clear tantamount parts of our faith, right? And that is one of the most beautiful parts of the Catholic faith, and it's something that Christ deliberately gave us in one of the biggest things he changed in the New Testament, that he is the New Testament. And I think I think that should be so clear that is a deliberate change of religion.
Yeah. And it shows you how much the faith is in the heads of the people now, this new faith, or this, how they are confused by this indifferentism and this ecumenism, how that leads to a loss of faith. If they tell you can believe basically everything, then you really start believing basically everything, and it really shows you that.
And I would say that that's the reason why there was such a huge amount of people that left the church 60s and 70s. I mean, it's like, what's the point? We don't have to follow the commandments of the church anymore. If it's not necessary. I mean, why go the hard way if I can just take an easier way? And that's why so many, not only lay people, but priests and religious abandoned their vocations because of what came forth from Vatican II.
That's really interesting. If you watch the movie, I did another podcast about this movie against Martin Luther, and it was done by some conservative Novus Ordo Catholics. And at the end, they do some interviews at this gathering of Lutherans and Catholics, because Bergoglio, of course, opened his arms to Martin Luther and Lutherans and said that Luther is, quote, one of us. And in one of these meetings, they went and they interviewed people and said, what do you think are the big differences between Protestants and Catholics? And there were several of them that said, oh, I don't really see any difference whatsoever. Pretty shocking. But on the flip side of that, and something that, again, one of our main topics, or maybe the main topic, is to talk about the Latin Mass. And I think that you did have on the other side, you had many people who said, hey, look, we this isn't right. So many people left. And then many other people said, we want tradition and we want faith. We want the Latin Mass, and we want the beauty that we used to have. And we're going to get into that real quick, but I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I do want to real quickly, before we move on to the SSPX and the history of the Latin Mass after Vatican II, I do want to talk about real quickly the issue with some of the sacraments from Vatican II, because I think that's really, really important. And I think that's something that we should really briefly mention is we say not just that they are a new religion from heresy and from their fruits, I suppose, but also because they changed some of the words of the sacraments. I know, Father Borja, you have some of the words of the change of the words of the consecration of bishops.
Yes, and I just to give a foreword to that, I find it interesting because Pope Leo XIII, back in the 1800s, he pronounced the orders of the Anglicans to be invalid in Apostolicae Curiae. And there was a change in the words, and he came out and said that, okay, all these years, and they looked into it. And he said they changed the significance of the words, or what the words signify, and those orders are invalid. And I would say that for those who are not familiar, haven't looked into this topic, his encyclical is very good on the Anglican orders, and it's something that helps us and guides us in these days. What were the principles that were followed, and why did it come to that conclusion? And I'd say, in regards to the Novus Ordo, it lives up to its name, new order. It has new sacraments, it's a new church, a new religion, etc. And it has broken away with the Catholic faith, the Catholic Church, and the attack on the sacraments, especially the sacrament of orders, is something that was, I'd say very diabolical, because of the fact that no valid priests, no valid bishops, no valid sacraments, in regards to penance, Holy Eucharist, etc., holy orders. So they obviously attacked this. So it was something that I can't remember the exact date. I want to say 1969 that the new rite of consecration of bishops was promulgated by Paul VI. But interestingly, before this all happened, back in the 40s, Pope Pius XII came out with this apostolic constitution called Sacramentum Ordinis, where he specifically gave us what the matter and the form of the sacraments of holy order are. And he gave us, these are the words of the form of the sacraments of sacrament of holy orders. So for there to be no confusion about this. And in the old rite, he said that the form was as follows for the consecration of bishops, quote, complete in thy priest the fullness of thy ministry, and adorned in the raiment of all glory, sanctify him with the dew of heavenly anointing. And so for the validity of the sacrament of orders, we have to have the words must signify the sacramental effects, and you have to have the power of order and the grace of the Holy Ghost. So you have the fullness of thy ministry, the raiment of all glory, gives us the power of the order of episcopacy, and the dew of heavenly anointing shows to us the grace of the Holy Ghost. So you have those two things that are necessary for in the form to the two requirements: the power of the order that be expressed, and the grace of the Holy Ghost. So these were requirements, like I said, that Pope Pius XII laid down. Now, in the new form, we obviously get into some issues. I'll quote to you the new form of the rite of consecration of bishops. Quote, so now pour out upon this chosen one that power which is from you, the governing spirit, whom you gave to your beloved Son, Jesus Christ, the Spirit given by him to the holy apostles, who founded the church in every place to be your temple, for the unceasing glory and praise of your name. End of quote. Now, in this, there's no, I don't think there's a problem in regards to the grace of the Holy Ghost being mentioned, but there's the expression that is at the very heart of the dispute over the validity of the orders of bishops, and that is the expression governing spirit. Now, Father Cicada did a wonderful work on this, and actually several works on the invalidity of the consecration of bishops. And interestingly, how this expression governing spirit is something that there's ambiguity behind it. And one of the very members of the study group that created the new rite raised this question. He raised this. He said, this does not adequately signify the sacrament. He says there's issues with using this term, governing spirit. And very early on, there was doubts that were raised up. Not, you can't blame the sedevacantists for saying that we're crazy, you guys are making this up. No, one of the very members of that study group that created the new rite said, there's problems with this, and it was glossed over. They tried to explain it away, and so I would say there's definitely issues and doubts in regards to the validity of the consecration of bishops. And think about it: no bishops, no valid priests, no valid sacraments. So it's really a diabolical thing that was done here.
Right, and as we say, with not just the sacraments, but with the entire change in general, that you can see clearly trying to, and they say publicly that they're trying to become more one with the world and kind of try to innovate and modernize. And you had people sitting in on it that were Protestants, and I believe Anglicans and Jews even, that were part of the Vatican Council and part of these groups of people who were actually writing changes to dogma and liturgy, which is pretty shocking. And I think that, from there, again, from all of this iffiness, I think it took some time for even the conservative people, even your really traditional Catholics, to realize the changes, because many of these things that happen in a council don't get spread, at least to the people, for maybe many years, and they don't really understand entirely what's going on. The new Mass was promulgated, I think, in the late 1960s, 1969, I think, if that's right. And I think that's when people started to wake up a little bit to, hey, well, something really dramatic is changing, and something is really, really wrong with this. And I think that there were plenty of issues even before that, like from Cardinal Audubiani. I guess he's maybe the famous one who wrote a letter regarding that. I mean, do we want to talk about that real briefly, the Audubiani Intervention? No. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, he one of the cardinals wrote something saying, hey, there are issues with this, and maybe there is a problem with the entire thing. Anyway, during this time, you did obviously have conservative bishops and priests, and even I assume cardinals. Many of them were put into their places by Pius XII. But there was little said about it until, in the 1970s, you had one of these breakaway bishops or archbishops named Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. And I don't know entirely his story. I know he was a big missionary in Africa. He had a very big presence in Africa. But it was a fairly big part of the church in Africa, but also was, I know, a member. He was at the Vatican Council, signed a few things, etc., but had a big issue with the changes and knew that he needed to continue with the Latin Mass and with the traditional Catholic Church as best as he could. And this was in the 1970s. Obviously, during this time, he was not getting along very well with Rome, but he was never excommunicated. It was just kind of this battle back and forth between what he could be allowed to do when he moved to Econ, Switzerland, which I believe, again, was sometime in the mid-70s, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong with any of this, fathers, but I think it was in the mid-70s. Anyway, long story short, issue after issue, and I think eventually it was the meetings in Assisi which really broke his back in terms of trying to remain with this new church, or trying to figure out if it was new or if it was the traditional church. And he consecrated 3 new bishops in 1988, I believe. And from that consecration of bishops, without the approval of the Vatican and without the approval of that was that Paul VI or John or JP2? That was Paul the VI. Which anti-pope was that, or false pope?
I was.
I believe it was JP2 by then.
Was it JP2 by the late 80s? It would be JP2. And so anyway, so Marcel Lefebvre, he was excommunicated from the new church, and kind of set up his own group. I guess he had done that previously, called the Society of St. Pius X. From the Society of St. Pius X, after this consecration of bishops, there was a group that split off called the Society of St. Peter's, because they did not want to be part of this new group that had been excommunicated due to this consecration of bishops. So from these two groups, really, you get many of your traditional Latin Mass groups you have today. You still have the Society of St. Peter, which is a group we'll talk about later, Society of St. Pius X, which I'm sure many people listening know about them very well, and many of our sedevacantists, including Father Cicada, who we mentioned earlier, Bishop Sanborn, and many other good sedevacantist bishops and priests. Do we want to talk about really briefly, too, Fathers, where many of our sedevacantists came from? Who are we and why are we here? As I said, many priests and bishops came from Archbishop Lefebvre, but where is everyone else from?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when you summarized this very nicely, we shouldn't forget about Archbishop Tuck, who very early on declared the see vacant. He made the statement that Rome is basically fallen away from the faith, and this modern Rome, so Rome is not Rome anymore. And he consecrated Bishop Carmona, who consecrated Bishop Pivarunas, and Archbishop Tuck also consecrated Bishop Gerard de Laurier, who, for example, also consecrated Bishop Storck, who I grew up under and who ordained Father Riesling. You made a show with him before. So there have been other bishops and priests. I think we talked about Castro Mayer at one point, who was also against those changes, and there have been groups and also priests. Some old priests, I know at least 2 here in the area, more or less in the area, who just stayed Catholic and didn't go along with the changes. Of course, they remained priests, so they didn't have any lineage, but they didn't go along with the changes that came with Vatican II or after Vatican II.
And I had mentioned earlier in the show notes or before the show that there was a priest in Mexico who was very much against what changes in the church that were coming from Vatican II. His name was Father Joaquin Sáenz, and he was a Jesuit. He was a theologian, and he actually wrote several books. One of the main ones being the New Montanian Church, and he also wrote another one called Sede Vacante. But he was the mentor, actually, of Bishop Carmona. He was Father Carmona at the time when things were confusing and weren't sure what was going on. Father Joaquin Sáenz was able to be a mentor, to guide others through what was going on and to open their eyes to the grave changes that were taking place. But he's not very well known, but in Mexico he was a huge advocate for the Latin Mass, for fighting against Vatican II, etc. And a lot of traditionalists down there in Mexico owe a lot to Father Joaquin Sáenz, but especially I would say those even sedevacantists, because of the fact that he helped Father Carmona at that time, and he was a huge asset there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting for us to look back now, because we're a different generation and we have our own different issues, obviously, which one we're talking about now, and in being able to interpret which Latin Mass is valid and whatnot. But back in the day, it really was very muddled. I think it was very hard, because was very new and it was kind of all coming out, and people were dealing with it at the moment, trying to figure out what the answers were. So I think that we're not getting into the details of many of these people, like Archbishop Lefebvre, who is praised by many and also has mud thrown on him by many. And I think the same with Archbishop Took. There was a lot of confusion. It was a very difficult time, and we're still in that time. But I think even then it was really kind of thrown into people all of a sudden. It was kind of almost this real chaos. And so to see some of these priests that stood up and just said no, I think that's a beautiful sign, of faith and people who truly understood what our Catholic faith is. And
that's true what you're saying. Like, they understood, because we today can look back, like you say, and we see the fruits and where things went. But they already understood at the beginning that those principles were wrong, without having all this history that led to what we see today. And I always admire that, how they clearly, and it was based back in the days. I mean, they were basically standing against the rest of the church, more or less, and that was a completely new situation. It's still a new situation, unprecedented in history, but we are kind of more or less getting maybe also used to that fact that the authority can lose the faith. Back then that was a really new situation, and so it was really amazing how clearly they must have seen in order to do what they did.
Right, and we get to benefit from that, and we get to benefit from still having the valid sacraments passed down by true bishops and by priests, and with the apostolic succession of bishops, and from, thank goodness, to a few men who really understood, like you say, that they really understood what was going on and stood up and were, I'm sure, very much persecuted in their time and now as well for what they believed in, and we get to benefit from that. And I guess we'll segue into, unless you fathers have anything more to say about that. I think we've been pretty clear about the issues with the Novus Ordo. I think it's very clear that as Bishop Sanborn would say, you have to decide really one thing. Did the Novus Ordo, were the changes substantial or accidental? If it's substantial, the church cannot be substantially changed, and thus it cannot be the church. So if it was substantially changed at Vatican II, at the council, then you can say absolutely without a question that it can no longer be the church, because the Catholic Church cannot be substantially changed, because of course it was given to us by Christ and the apostles. And if that's the case, then the Novus Ordo is a new church. And so I think hopefully that's fairly clear. So, but I think the issue that I see with people is that it's very clear for, let's say, conservative Catholics, even sedevacantists, to see Francis, or Bergoglio, I should say, he's not the Pope. I mean, this is pretty easy. The things he says are not Catholic. This is okay. If we go into one of our modern churches, there's a church near Father Heyne in the town next to his that looks like an anthill. It looks like some water treatment plant, and it's a church. You would never believe it. And so from the signs, you can say, okay, this is clearly not Catholic. But I guess more of the issue is trying to help people, educate people of what is not Catholic, even if it has these outward signs, even if it does look nice, even if it has the Latin Mass. And I guess the first one that we would talk about, I think the easiest one to define, would be the Society of St. Peter, which I mentioned before. They were the ones who hung around with kind of staying in union with Rome after the consecration of bishops by Archbishop Lefebvre. And so I don't know which one of you wants to just briefly describe what are the issues. Why can we say that you cannot just attend this Mass even though it's a Latin Mass?
Well, I'd say that, the Fraternity of St. Peter, first off, they are part of the new church. They're just a side altar in the modern church, in the new church, in Novus Ordo. And the thing is that their men are ordained, quote unquote, by a Novus Ordo priest. And we spoke about just the whole aspect of the change in the consecration of the right for bishops. And that's obviously a huge thing, because I would consider them to be invalid priests because of that. Despite the fact that the Novus Ordo bishop used the old rite, that doesn't change the fact that the bishops themselves have been consecrated in the new form, in the new rite, and that's a problem. And the aspect of that, they have the approval of Rome, and they have to be careful about what they say. They can't really be very strong or very straightforward about Vatican II and the errors of Vatican II. They, like I said, it's just for them it's more of a not so much theology, but more so the externals, having the Latin Mass, having the bells and the whistles, so to say, just a side chapel in the new church.
And one thing that just popped up in my mind when you said, Father, with the validity of their ordination, they are ordained in the old rite as priests, but their bishops are bishops who are consecrated in the new rite. And for some people, that is not something that they would be aware of. And I know I met a priest from the Society of St. Peter. In fact, he became sedevacantis now. But he told me that was something that he, even back then, when he was ordained some years ago, that hit him, because he knew, okay, I'm getting ordained here in the new Latin, in the new rite, in the old rite, which is good, but I know my bishop, he was consecrated in the new rite, so that's kind of strange. And he also said, that's interesting, because what you just said before, Kevin, with the older priests from the Society of St. Peter, they left the Society of St. Pius X. So they got their ordinations, their priestly ordinations, from the bishops who Lefebvre consecrated. And even after they left, and there were new young priests coming, and they got ordained with the Novus Ordo bishops and so forth, or with bishops with the new rite. Even then, they looked upon them like a little bit like, yeah, okay, you get the new ordination. Maybe not laughing, but kind of they were aware of a difference. And although they didn't explicitly say, of course, that it's invalid, I mean, they couldn't have said that, but they were aware that there are some priests in the Society of St. Peter who were still ordained by bishops who were consecrated in the old rite. And then there are priests, the younger priests, the new priests who joined later, who were ordained by bishops who were consecrated in the new rite. So they are aware. They are aware of the differences and the changes.
And right. So in essence, the Society of St. Peter, and there are others. We'd say there are indult groups, or used to be indult, I guess, before Benedict XVI's motu proprio kind of allowed the Latin Mass, I guess, temporarily, or I don't know the exact details. Yeah, so you kind of let it happen. But before that, it was the indult, and we called it the indult masses. But really, it was members of the Novus Ordo. It was members of this, what we already established as a new religion. This is no longer the Catholic faith. We established that earlier. So if you're saying it's no longer the Catholic faith, does it matter if they have all the bells and whistles, right? I mean, that's essentially the question, right? I mean, just because it looks nice and because they say the right things, and maybe even if they do the right things, I guess now, if you're still part of this new church, it's not the Catholic Church, right? I mean, I guess that's essentially the issue with them, that they have never broken away from Bergoglio, from JP2, from Ratzinger, from all of these other false popes, and from Vatican II. So they cannot be not just valid, they're still in union with everything that is heretical and bad from Vatican II, and from all the false popes who came after it. So I guess in the end, don't get hung up on nice things. The Catholic faith is not just about beautiful churches and nice incense and stuff, right? I mean, that's I guess, to me, that shouldn't be so complicated for sedevacantists. But I know it can be. I know people do fall into that. They fall into the idea of, well, they're traditionalists.
Right, and we have to be. I think that's a trap. I mean, that it's a Latin Mass, and it's much more than the Latin Mass. There's theological reasons behind it as well. That we need to have theological reasons.
I think that's very good to say that, because the Mass is an expression of a new faith, and you can't have, like we said before, you can't have the new faith and the old faith under one roof, basically.
Right.
So exactly. I think if you understand that, that's actually pretty good that you just brought it up, Father, because if you understand that the two masses are the lex orandi, lex credendi, right? I mean, the way you pray, that's what you believe, so the two masses are basically the expression of two different faiths.
And even in the Novus Ordo, the Novus Ordo is considered the ordinary form, and the Latin is considered the extraordinary form. So it's not even the normal form of the Mass.
Right, so it's like an exception. Like, well, we'll be nice to you. We'll throw you a carrot and keep these crazy conservatives. I mean, how many times has Bergoglio said these? What does he even call them? He calls them like these crazy extremists, right? He really has some crazy words for these people who want to stick by tradition, and he just hits them over the head all the time. But it wasn't the case, obviously, with JP2 and Ratzinger. We're a little more lenient in terms of saying, okay, we'll give you a little carrot and let you have your Latin Mass, but nothing else changed, right? I mean, again, like you said, Father, they didn't change their theology, they didn't change the dogmas that had been totally destroyed and totally thrown under the bus, at Vatican Council, and by your JP2 in one hand is saying, here, I'll allow you the Latin Mass, and in the other hand, he's getting cow dung put on his forehead in the sign of Shiva from these people from India. So, why should we care? Why should we care if he gave them approval to do the Latin Mass when he's clearly, an apostate in the seat of Peter? I mean, I think that. So it's I guess we're already getting to 40 minutes, and we haven't even talked about the meat and potatoes of this entire podcast. That's all right. It's all right. I think I'm hoping it's good information. So we have to get into next then the issues with the Society of St. Pius X. And I think that it's really important because obviously it's a very confusing topic. It's a very difficult topic, and it's one that has many, I guess you could say, nuances and whatnot, and not a whole lot of defined, I wouldn't say issues, but defined answers. But I think we want to try to clarify, what are the issues with going to St. Pius X? What are the issues just with St. Pius X and in the society in general? I don't know where do we want to start with this, Fathers?
I'd say, the main issue is the principal issue, or the summarizing issue, I think, would be that they are acknowledging this new church as the Catholic Church. And I think from this, all other problems come, as far as I would say. They say this Novus Ordo Church. And I think we said, at the beginning we said this, and we said this in the last show, this Novus Ordo Church is a new church. We have to really, and I think you summarized it very well, Kevin, before. Once you recognize that this is a new church, not the Catholic Church anymore, then this way, the road that the Society of Pius X is taking is basically not doable. Although they might keep the true rights, the valid ordinations, not anymore so, by the way, but we talk about this later probably. But even if you keep the Latin Mass, as long as you say this is the Catholic Church, then you don't see the problem, the essence of the problem.
Right, and so you're going there to the Latin Mass. You have perhaps the valid sacraments, but right, it leads to a whole lot of confusion, right? I mean, if you're going there and they're saying that, hey, they have a picture of Bergoglio on the wall, acknowledging him as the Pope. If he is the Pope, then what he promulgates must be true, right? And this is a whole nother issue, right? With the what we talked about before the show, the recognize and resist, which is Father Borja told me that I didn't know this, but it was a term coined by the late great Father Cicada, which is I think is kind of brilliant. In which, from what I know, when I listen to their podcast or whatnot, they fully accept that term. I've heard them call themselves that, recognize and resist. Some of them, I don't know all of them, but some of them do. Which I think is actually fairly shocking when you think about it, because what they're saying is I recognize Bergoglio as Pope and I resist him as Pope, which of course is completely contrary to Catholic teaching.
And that's where I mean, that's one of the things that their theological position is a contradiction. So I think the difference between the Fraternity of St. Peter and Society of St. Pius X is that Society, for the most part, have valid priests. They have bishops that were correctly consecrated and priests that were correctly ordained. Though, as a thing, I think, if I'm not mistaken, now they accept when Novus Ordo priests want to come and join their group, that they do not reordain them in the conditionally reordain them. They just accept them as is, and that's, for me, a huge red flag. So that would be a huge issue in regards to the Society of St. Pius X, but also their position, just the contradiction of, we recognize Bergoglio, but we resist him, and that's just an undermining of of what they hold the authority of the church is, and that's a very I would say a schismatic attitude. Just that whole aspect of he's the Pope, but we're not going to obey him, and that's something that can be very confusing for people, and might not realize that that's not a Catholic attitude, not a Catholic mindset by any means, to recognize and resist.
Right, and we owe the Pope and the hierarchy of the Church our obedience, right? I mean, that's not a new thing. I mean, the infallibility of the Pope was, I believe, defined by, that was Pope Pius IX, I believe, at Vatican I Council, which obviously is a big part of this as well.
Yes, and that's why he is the one who is supposed to keep up the teaching of Christ pure and reliable. And now he's turned into something that you have to check what he's saying, and you have to correct him, and you can't listen to him, basically, and you see that he's saying things that contradict Christ. I mean, what idea of the papacy is that? What idea of a pope is that? And this is basically one of the reasons also why we say that he can't be the Pope, because of the great dignity of the papacy, and because you destroy the papacy basically if you say that he is just somebody that you have to, sometimes you can obey him, sometimes you don't, and somebody basically who does not keep up is not a representative of Christ, basically.
And he's not the guardian. The Pope is supposed to be the guardian of the deposit of the faith. And if you're saying that he's attacking the faith or teaching things that are not of the Catholic faith, it's like, what's the point of having a Pope? Well, a Pope is supposed to protect and guide the Church. He has been given that power from Christ. And you're saying that he is not a true guardian, that he is in fact destroying the faith, and that's just a contradiction.
Well, and I think it's interesting that the other side, the R&R group, would always come at you with, I think it's Matthew 16, where he says the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church, right? Or shall not prevail against it, I guess they say. And so they'd always say, well, so you're saying that there is no Pope. Of course, you're sedevacantism. So you're saying there is no Pope, there is no church. And I think from our perspective, it's really the exact opposite, right? We're saying, well, if you claim this, if you claim Francis Bergoglio to be your Pope, if you claim the Novus Ordo to be your church, and then you go and say that it's all bad and terrible, then you're the one saying, right? They're the ones saying that the devil has prevailed. They're the ones saying that our Pope is wrong and is in error. And they admit it. I mean, really, they do. I mean, if you watch these other YouTube channels or podcasts of these R&R people, they spend 90% of their time trying either to defend what Bergoglio said somehow, or they try to kind of say that what he said was wrong, which is, of course, as Father Heyne said, it's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a really sad idea of the papacy and also of the church. The church is basically defined as or let's say the church is the spotless bride of Christ. Spotless, I mean, we say in the Creed, we believe in the Holy Catholic Church, the Holy Church, not because everybody is holy who is a member of the church, but because the church has the true teaching, which is holy because it's a right teaching, God's teaching, and it's also holy because it's the way to holiness. And the church is also holy because it has the holy sacraments they have the supernatural power to help us to get to sanctity. And so that's why the church is the spotless bride of Christ. Now, they basically believe in a bride of Christ that can be what would be the correct English word, like sullied or like with dirt on it,
right?
Correct.
And pardon me?
No, go ahead.
So they basically believe in a dirty church. And if you make yourself that aware of that, then you see how much they lose of this purity of the church and this idea of a pure and spotless and holy church.
Yeah, and I think that they use sedevacantism as a bad word, and I think we would almost use sedevacantism as a bad word. It's not a nice word. It's a bad thing. It's a bad time. I guess bad is the wrong word, but it's not a good thing. The interregnum. It means there is no pope at this moment, right? And it's happened, of course, many times in the past between popes, and so it's not like we stand here and say, "Yay, we love this." This is fantastic. We don't have a pope. We don't have a hierarchy. This is great. Of course, it's not, but we do have that true regard and respect for the actual Catholic faith and what it stood for 2,000 years before this. And I think that I wish they could see that, because I think I see so many of these people who are these public figures, and I think they're miserable. They're absolutely miserable. And I think in a way, sometimes they hate their faith, because if Bergoglio was my pope, I would sometimes hate it too. I mean, how can you not? I wrote down in our show notes some of the quotes that he has, and just one of them. This one that just always gets me. He said, and this is a quote: "Proselytism is solemn nonsense. It makes no sense." Proselytism, of course, being going and trying to convert people to Catholicism. He says all the time, you don't need to convert anyone; they're all fine. So in the end, as Father Heyne said earlier, what's the point? Why have a faith at all? Why be Catholic? I mean, if it's all good, go find the easier one, And I think I think when you see someone who's as much of a public issue as Bergoglio is, I think you see one of the issues when you're saying your mass in union with him, right? And then that's another one of the issues with the Pius X.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue that we have to talk about when we say Latin Mass is not enough and so forth, that the Society of Pius X says they're a Mass in union with that new Rome. Now, this is something that is not so clear to many, and we are always stressing the fact that you should only go to non-unacum masses, and so this unacum is a term that pops up often, and maybe it's not so common and not so known to people. I think most of the listeners probably know that is from the beginning of the canon, where the priest says that he offers the sacrifice for the Catholic Church in union with the Pope and the bishops, or we would say not with the Pope, just with the Orthodox, with the people who have the right faith. And so now with this unacum, often people say, yeah, I'm just praying, or the priest is just praying for the Pope, for, let's say, for his conversion or whatever. And what I would like to really, this is the one point that I would really like to stress and make clear, is that every Mass is not just said individually, independent of everything else, but the Mass is said as a Mass of the Church. And the Council of Trent says that very nicely. It says here in Latin it would be ab ecclesia per sacerdotes. By the Church, it is said by the Church through the priests. So that shows you that every Mass is actually a Mass of the whole Church. And this is why there is this una cum, because every Mass is also, let's say, virtually said by the whole Church, by the Pope, by the bishops. That's why they, first of all, also gain fruits from every Mass that is said. So the priest doesn't say the Mass just by himself, like as his Mass, but it's also always in this context of the whole Church. And that's why he offers every Mass for the whole Church as well, because every sacrifice, since it is offered by the whole Church, it is also fruitful for the whole Church. And then later on, in the memento, which is in the missal would be the next paragraph, in the memento, he includes some people that he wants to include. And it's interesting, in this memento, the priest can remember everybody, basically, that he wants to include in the Mass, even non-Catholics that he wants to just pray for. But up at the so-called una cum, at the Te Igitur, in this prayer Te Igitur, there's always only the Pope, and if there is no Pope, then no Pope is mentioned. So that shows you that by the priest, by putting the name of that, let's say in this case Francis in here, he puts himself, or he says the Mass as a Mass of this new Church. And if you understand that shows you the importance, and that shows you actually the what actually happens when you go to a Latin Mass, or what happens in a Latin Mass, which might be valid. Let's say it's offered by a valid priest, like most of the priests still of the Society of Pius X. And if this priest offers a valid Mass, but he offers it as a Mass of this new Church, not of the Catholic Church, but of this new Church, because he mentions those new hierarchies. So it is true to say, when you mention Francis here, then you say your Mass in union with this new Rome. And this is the good question, if that can be pleasing to God.
No, so, that's very well said, Father. And I think that, I love it. I think that's a really good explanation. I think that we would just finish that off with, I know, Father Borja, you had kind of the other side of that, of how do the people interact in that same way, and how are they also part of the sacrifice of the Mass?
Yeah, Pope Pius XII in Mediator Dei, he mentions it pretty clearly. So he mentions here, I'll just quote from Mediator Dei from Pope Pius XII. He says, quote, "Not only, says Innocent III of immortal memory, do the priest offer the sacrifice, but also all the faithful. For what the priest does personally by virtue of his ministry, the faithful do collectively by virtue of their intention. We are happy to recall one of St. Robert Bellarmine's many statements on the subject. The sacrifice, he says, is principally offered in the person of Christ. Thus, the oblation that follows the consecration is a sort of attestation that the whole Church consents in the oblation made by Christ and offers it along with him," end of quote. And so it shows that the Church consents in the oblation made by Christ. And you're partaking, if the priest is mentioning the name of Francis, you're partaking in that new church. Essentially, you are acknowledging and agreeing, in essence, with that new church.
And that shows, I think that quote, Father, shows very nicely that you can. Some people say, "Yeah, I'm withholding the intention when I'm attending those masses. I make my own intention or whatever." That doesn't work, because that mass is said in union with Rome, and you can make whatever intention you want. It is not in It is not the intention of that mass, because the intention of the mass is made by the priest. And if you are attending that mass, then you're attending at a mass that is said in this intention, or in union with Rome in this case. So making or withholding your own intention doesn't change anything about the mass.
And just to add to that, I mean, you think about, the heresies that are taught by the Novus Ordo, etc. And I just wanted to mention, there was a really neat story of a feast day we celebrated not too long ago, but it was Saint Hermenegilt. And he was living during the time of the Arian heresy. And he was, if I'm not mistaken, locked up by his father because he would not go along with the Arian heresy. And his father sent an Arian priest, a heretic, to him and said, if you receive Holy Communion from him, I'll set you free. Granted, that priest was a valid priest. It was a valid Eucharist, but Saint Hermenegilt would not partake in the heresy of that Arian priest, and he refused. He flatly refused, and he was put to death by his father because of that. And he's a martyr in the calendar of the church.
Yeah, that's very good, and that's exactly how the church always acted. Let's think of the schismatics, for example. Let's say in the so-called good old days, a Catholic was not allowed to receive the sacraments or go to a mass of the schismatics. Let's say the Orthodox, although they still had, even today, they still have valid ordinations, valid sacraments. It was a valid mass with a valid apostolic rite, but you couldn't go there as a Catholic because they were schismatic. They were not in union with Rome. Or for example, Father Riesling, like Kevin, you did this show with him. He was in Russia, and they had to wait. I mean, I'm sure there were Orthodox Russian Orthodox masses all over the place, but they had to wait for this Catholic priest who had 20 weddings during the night at 3 a.m. or something like that, and said mass even with only a stole on, with no vestment, because he was so persecuted. And they did not go to the Orthodox, and stuck with the Catholic priest.
Well, I think that's a really good answer to the argument of people who will say, well, what if I can never have the sacraments? What if it's only SSPX or it's nothing? What if I live in Siberia and there's only one SSPX mass and I'll never ever be able to? And I think we had another example that I think we all know is the Japanese Catholics, and they went, I don't know the exact amount of time, but I think it was several generations without ever having any Catholic priest. But they retained the faith. I mean, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's very encouraging too, that you can even raise your children. You can keep the faith yourself. You can live the faith even without being able to attend mass, if you can't, unfortunately. So you can still live your faith. And those Japanese people, Catholics, they are really a motivation or an encouragement to us, I guess, especially in situations when mass is not very accessible, and also for us to answer the question what we should do then.
Right, and it's better to have that goodwill and the desire to receive pure and holy sacraments that have no issue, there's no blemish, there's no doubt than to go to a mass and sacraments that there is doubt. I mean, and I think doubt in terms of mass and sacraments is a very, very serious thing, right? This is not just going to someone for advice and maybe they'll tell you something wrong and maybe not. I mean, this is a very serious thing. The mass is the most important thing we can ever be part of, and the sacraments obviously too are coming straight from God, and we can't just willy-nilly hope that the priest at the Pius X church is actually a Pius X priest, right? I mean, that's a whole nother issue, and for me it gets clearer and clearer and worse for the Pius X that it's just, I think it's untenable.
We just had a situation here in Munich, actually, at the chapel of the Society of Pius X, where they introduced a new priest who came from Novus Ordo and was not at least conditionally reordained. So actually the situation becomes clearer, because the more they are getting closer with Rome, now they, as you said before, or as we said before, they don't reordain priests anymore. So I think then for some people it becomes even more clear and more easy to decide that this is not a way that they could go. If you don't know which priest is offering Mass today, or even if the priest where he is from the society, originally and validly ordained, offers the Mass, you don't know if you receive the host that was maybe consecrated by the other priest the day before or whatever. So it becomes clearer, and it should become clear, because they are getting closer. I mean, we might talk about this later, but they get closer to Rome. The crazier Rome gets for some reason, interestingly enough, and they want to even get closer to Rome. And the more they do that, the more clearer the situation gets, I guess.
And what other arguments do the Recognize and Resist crowd or the SSPX have, I guess, for their arguing for themselves or arguing against us? And I mean, I guess one of those I know that we hear fairly often is the fruits, right? That there are many good fruits coming from the Pius X and even St. Peter's. You'll hear that too. There's many young people, there's many families, there's many, I don't know about vocations, but that's one of the arguments. And how do we answer that? What do we say when they say there are good fruits?
So I would say, I mean, good fruits is one thing. I mean, you can say that the Protestants have good fruits. You can say that the non-Catholics have good fruits. And what I mean by that, well, Protestants, they do a lot of good on a natural level in regards to helping the poor, feeding the hungry, going on quote unquote missions, etc. And on a natural level, they do a lot of good. So just natural goodness is not necessarily a testament to making a religion true or not. In that aspect, I mean, so you can make that argument for, like I said, for non-Catholics as well. So it's not necessarily just good fruits. There has to be more than just that.
That can throw you off sometimes, because you have people coming to you and saying, "Hey, I saw this on YouTube, this or that priest, maybe Novus Ordo or maybe whatever. He healed people, or he seems to be casting out devils and so forth." And it was, like you said, Kevin, before, it was one of the Radecki brothers, I think, who I approached with that question, because it really can kind of throw you off a little bit. But he said, look at that quote that Christ said, there will be people saying to him, "Hey, Lord, didn't we cast out devils in your name?" and so forth. I can't remember where it is, but it's they say like, "Didn't we cast out devils in your name?" and so forth. And Jesus says, "Go away, I don't know you." That, I think that is pretty clear. That shows pretty clearly that even casting out devils is not a proof that you are a follower of Christ, I guess. Seems to be.
Right. Well, and even and then you'll hear, they give great sermons or something. And there was a priest I know in in our area near Denver in the SSPX. This is 20 years ago now, and he gave really great sermons. I heard some of them, and they were really moving and made you come to tears. And I mean, really brilliant sermons. And then you hear him 20 years later, and unfortunately, he's really gone off the deep end and really, truly open to public error and really silliness almost. And you just see that. I mean, you can't bet on these signs, right? You can't just say it looks good now, it sounds good. It has to have the dogmas, right? It has to have the backbone of the church. And it's not only the liturgy. Liturgy is obviously part of it. The Latin Mass is part of it, and it's a beautiful part of it, but it's not the only thing. And I think that's such an important part that you can't get hung up. And I know we've said this several times, but don't get hung up on it being nice. I mean, here we have a good example in Munich. We have a small parish and a small chapel, and you're around here in Bavaria where they have these brilliant cathedrals and stuff. And sure, sometimes I'm sure every one of us is like, wow, it would be really nice to have one of these churches. It'd be great to celebrate Mass in this gigantic cathedral. But if you're not offering the actual sacrifice of the Mass and the real sacraments, then, I mean, why does it matter? I mean, who cares how small your church is? I mean, how few people you have? I mean, that's the true beauty. It's not in the stuff.
Mm.
Another argument that just to add to that, another argument that I've heard is like, well, where's the visibility of the church then? Where do we find the visible church if it's just among the sedevacantists? And I don't know, Father, I think you had a quote in regards to that.
Yeah, from Ludwig Ott, from the Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma, when he talks about this external visible side of the church. He says, I'm quoting here, a threefold sensible bond binds the members of the church to one another and makes them known as such: the profession of the same faith, the use of the same means of grace, and the subordination to the same authority. So I think that's even showing that you can basically use that argument against them, because they say, like you just said, Father, they use this as saying, hey, your structure is basically not visible, or you have no visible head, so you can't be the church. But when you understand what visibility actually means, it's not only having a certain structure, but it is having the same faith, the same means of grace, so the sacraments, and subordination to the same authority. And I mean, they are not subordinated to the same authority because they know that they can't obey him. The profession of the same faith, they wouldn't have the same faith as this Novus Ordo Church, and the same means of grace. They have they stick to the old sacraments, and that shows you that they are not one visible unity with that new church. It even shows you that the new church is basically is visibly not the Catholic Church, because they have a different faith from the apostles. They don't have the apostolic faith. They have new sacraments, and they have an authority that is not going along with the popes before. So that shows you, actually, this visibility argument shows you, when you understand what visibility actually means, it's actually a proof that the Novus Ordo Church cannot be the Catholic Church, because it's not, as I just said, doesn't share the same faith and the same sacraments and the same authority.
And interestingly, even for people who do accept Bergoglio, it's like, can you truly say that they have unity, that they have this leadership? I mean, they're just as divided.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I see almost every day that the German bishops are almost in schism. I mean, it's really all the time. I really do see it. It's just like, okay, just do it already. Come on, just make it happen. And it's always this warning, and they never actually do it. But that's totally right. But that's part of also the error and the heresy of collegiality, right? I think that they kind of put that on themselves. They're like, yeah, okay, we're going to make it so bishops in their own diocese or in their own, regions or whatever, archbishops, cardinals, whoever, they can kind of make their own rules and do it however they want. And the popes kind of a figurehead. Honestly, he's kind of this guy who goes and makes nice speeches, and like JP2 travels around the world and visits the poor and says nice things, but that's about it. And obviously, again, you see why these things are heresies, right? There's also a practical side of it too. I mean, eventually it just gets to be kind of silly when you're saying there are 4 marks of the Holy Church of the Catholic Church, and they clearly don't have any of them. And I mean, and obviously it's a sad thing, and I think it's something that I think we all know that more of this fault, of course, is on the bishops and priests and the popes and all of this with air quotes, that they call themselves this. They're more at error than the laity, the people who follow them, because many of these people are following because they're doing what their pastors are telling them to do, right? And I think that's obviously been a huge issue for 60 years now, that they're just doing what they're told. Yeah,
that's what we have to be sorry, I guess, or grateful for us that we can see those things, but also feel sorry for people who are led astray by those authorities, and pray for them, and pray also for the authorities for that they see clearly, or that they see the wrong, that they are on the wrong road, and other people like the R&R or whatever, or SSP, that they see clearly where the problem is and give them the strength to make a clear stand, I guess, towards this new church.
Right, exactly. And I mean, anyone really searching for the truth will hopefully eventually find it. I think that God will give them the grace for that if they're truly searching for it. And I mean, for us as sedes, I think most people listening to this channel, I assume, are already sedevacantists. And I think that a valuable thing for them to know is to go and try to understand what's going on a little better, and honestly start from the catechism. I mean, I found that my wife and I started going back and just reading my Catholic faith, and it's just pretty amazing the things that you need to brush up on. I mean, just the simple things that you learn as a kid. I hadn't been asked these questions for 25 years, and I think that's so important. I'm sure you fathers tell people this all the time, right? So I'm just I'm preaching to the choir and to the people on this channel, obviously. But I mean, really go back and learn the basics of your faith, but also learn the what is sedevacantism. And I'm going to attach to this video that there's one that's I think is absolutely brilliant from Bishop Sanborn. He did a talk in England a few years ago where, from the ones I've watched, and I've watched many, and there are many good ones. I mean, Bishop Hevrunis has great ones. The Radecki Fathers have amazing ones, great books as well. Father Cicada, of course, is brilliant. But the one that Bishop Sanborn did it's extremely step-by-step logical, and just saying, okay, this is exactly why we come to this conclusion. So I'm going to attach that to this video because I think it's a very, very highly recommendable watch for everyone to just get an idea of why do we believe what we believe. And I think that we shouldn't just say, okay, the priest tells us. Unfortunately, in these times, it's not enough. We need to know so we can explain to other people, and explain, okay, why is just the Latin Mass not enough? And I think on that note, do either of you have anything you want to finish with? I'm sure we had you both had tons of notes. Is there anything big that we missed? I think we covered most bases.
Right. I mean, nothing big. I would just say as a final note, that we have to work on this, that we see clearly, and that we have to that we understand that we have the spotless pride of Christ. That we appreciate, like you said before, even if the situation might be not perfect, that we have to live in today, and trying, and it's a certain way of persecution and testing our faith, that we see the positive side of it, that we see that the way we try to solve the problem is that we still have this spotless pride of Christ, and that we want to be truthful to the spotless pride of Christ, and that we see clearly, more and more clearly, that when we look at the Novus Ordo Church, they might be in those old churches, but they have new vestments, they have a new altar. Even they don't even use the original Catholic altars. They had to introduce their own altars, and they have a new mass. They have new sacraments. So I think it's also a nice thing to see more and more the newness, the fact that this new church is truly a new church, a non-Catholic church, a new church that they created in order to fit in with this new order that they, like John the 23rd, he praised this new order that the mankind is now entering into at his opening remark to the Vatican Council. And especially now in those Corona times where we hear about this new order a lot more, I think, than a couple of years ago, that makes us clear that they truly wanted to establish a new order, secularum, a new order of the world. And for this, they had this religious side to it, the religious arm, and they needed this new order church. And in order to fit this is what Father Borja said at the beginning very nicely, this new church with this indifferentism, because you can't have a Catholic church in the new order, in the new world order, because it doesn't fit in there. It's fighting it, actually.
Perfect. Any last words, Father Borja?
No, just the aspect of being grateful for what we have and thanking God for the graces that he has given to us, and just especially thinking if there's no crown without the cross. So we definitely, these times are not easy. Definitely a big cross to be living during these times with what we see and what we have to bear with. But nevertheless, it's a time for great saints, and it's a time for us to really rise to the occasion and live our Catholic faith to its fullest, and to be grateful for the beauty of our Catholic faith and what we have.
Perfect. Thank you both so much for all the time you spent on this show and in any preparation you did. I hope that it's fruitful for anyone listening. If anyone has any questions, I would ask that you send them. You don't need to send the questions to me, but send the requests through me, and then I will forward it to one of the priests. So my email is attached to the show on Podbean and on YouTube. So again, if you have any questions, which there may be many, go ahead and send me the request. I will send your email and contact information to the fathers, just so that they're not getting any junk mail or anything. So send it through to me. I'm sure they would be very willing and happy to answer your questions. But again, send it to my email address, and I will definitely, I promise you, I will forward your information to them so that they can answer any questions that you might have, because this is, of course, a very difficult subject that does require some time and some thought in getting it in around our heads, and they would be happy to help you with that, I am very sure. So again, fathers, thank you so much. We'll have you back again for another show sometime, if you'll be back. That is. And until then, God bless.
Yeah,
thank you, Kevin. Bless you.
You've been listening to the Catholic Family Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends and family. You can support the production on Patreon and PayPal, and you can reach Kevin at kevin89davis@gmail.com. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam, all for the greater glory of God.